What's up, everybody? Wanted to do something a little different today. So these are basically my top 5 decks to play in best of 1, like the decks that I have the most success. I kind of been rotating through these as far as like my enjoyment, obviously my win rate, and just decks that I feel like have the most balanced approach to the best of 1 metagame. So let's start off with number 1, which is Dimir for me. I have adjusted this list a little bit based on recent cards that I've added in. Let me kind of set it up real fast. Get all of our flyers in one spot. A lot of flyers, and that's part of the reason that it's so successful. So yeah, so here's kind of where things are at for me with this list. So I like the 7 removal with 5 being able to remove pretty much everything. I like the 2-2 split of Dream Thief and Siren. I do like the tokens from Siren, but I also like Dream Thief's ability to surveil and then Dream Thief's ability to draw a card later. Both of these abilities come in handy, and in best of 1 you want to have the ability to do multiple things. Sometimes surveying is what I need to do to find a land, and a lot of times you really get stuck on like 2 or 3 lands in this deck. I love being at 4 Fairy Mastermind because it's a non-legendary and because of its ability to close out games with Shieldred, and that's why I play 3 Shieldred. I did add in 2 Cryptic Coat, and I think that's a really good card for games that take a lot longer because it's harder to remove artifacts, and it can kind of just regenerate your board, get creatures. It's just a really good card, and I think it's a good 2-of. I still like having a couple of Preacher because of its ability to draw cards, gain 1/1 vampires, go wide, and just be a really good defender, but I don't think it's as necessary because this card is just really good, and it's kind of in the spot where Preacher would go. With Make Disappear, I think 3 is where you want to be at. You could go to 4 also, just depending on your playstyle. I may move this back to 4. With the list I was just playing, 4 felt really nice. There are a lot of combo decks and cards right now that are just so powerful, and just being able to counter things and pace them out. And one of my favorite things to do, and probably honestly one of the reasons why I want to go up to 4, is I love just being able to have Fairy Mastermind, a Go for the Throat, and a Make Disappear in my hand. And it just gives me 3 different options of what to do on my opponent's turn. Like, do I want to just be more aggressive if they don't do anything? Do I want to counter something that I don't have an answer for, or do I want to kill something? So that to me is one of my favorite reasons to play this deck, and why this deck is so successful, because most every card in the deck is 2 or less mana. Urtai is a good closer as far as countering big spells, and then Gix obviously just to draw you a ton of cards with all your flyers. And then even Malcolm draws you a little bit of cards, and Preacher of course. And then Cryptic Code is a pseudo draw because you're getting cards off the top of your deck that you can flip over, especially later in the game, and you can just keep returning it to your hand and making creatures. So, and then a couple of Mirrex tokens for those longer games as well. But this list, I mean, I don't know the exact percent, but I want to say the win rate it's definitely at least 80%. It's probably more than that, but I would say 80 is a safe bet for where this deck is at right now in the best of 1. I did toy around with like 1 March of Wretched Sorrow as another way to gain life, but typically because you draw so many cards in this deck and your ability to draw with Shieldred and the Preacher and the Bat, like usually you're doing okay. I did make a sideboard as well for best of 3 of kind of where I would be at. Obviously that's not my expertise because I don't play a lot of best of 3, but just based on where the meta is at and what I know about it, that's kind of where the list is at. But this is definitely my number 1 choice of decks to play in best of 1 right now. Here is my number 2 choice, is Golgari Midrange. And I think Golgari, what it has to offer is just a very, very well balanced approach at facing everything in the meta. So you have really good removal, you have enchantment removal, you have life gain removal, and you have, obviously you can ramp up into this for longer games with Tortoise, which I think Tortoise is absolutely necessary in best of one because it gives you an advantage. And the best card in the deck is Restless Cottage. It really is, because with Tortoise it becomes a 5/5. You're exiling people's graveyard. You're gaining life. It becomes cheaper with Tortoise. It's just a constant threat and a nuisance. Whenever I play against Golgari, I'm always worried about Cottage, and usually what beats me is Cottage. So having Tortoise in there is just huge for this deck, because not only does it ramp you up into your bigger spells, fill your graveyard to help your virtues, it gets you more cottages. It gets you your cottages back after they die, and that's such a huge thing. Every time I play this card, it usually gets removed right away, and that tells me that my opponents feel the same way that I do. There's a good amount of card draw on this deck. Dread Knight is obviously a nuisance, and it pairs well with Shieldred. You could go up to 3 Shieldred. I've toyed with that back and forth, but where I'm at right now is 2, and part of that is because I have the life gain with Frillback. And Frillback fits really nicely right now because there are so many graveyard reanimation decks. And obviously we have Cottage, but Frillback is just like your game plan's over. So some games Frillback will just win. It's great against mono red. It also destroys artifacts and enchantments. There's an argument that you could play a third one of these. But you do have Glissa, and Glissa is just an amazing card, still is an amazing card. And then we also have Preacher and Sentinel, the Nameless City. Sentinel is great against Wandering Emperor, it's great at finding lands, pumping up your creatures, pumping up Glissa, pumping up Shieldred. This deck just has answers for everything. I do play 2 Path of Perils for those super aggro decks, and I also play a couple of white lands, which I have found to be really nice to be able to cleave this occasionally if need be. 2 Liliana for control matchups, for Domain. Domain is probably our worst matchup in best of one when we come across that, where I'm like, if we don't win this fast with like a super aggro start of like some bats and Dread Knight into one of these 3 drops, it's probably not gonna. We're probably not gonna win. Cottage definitely helps, but that's just a tough matchup. We do have cards that help us in that matchup in the sideboard. Deadly Cover Up is a big one. Duress, Liliana. But that's just all around tough matchup. I mean, the thing about Golgari, besides Dread Knight just making it such a good deck, and Tortoise being such a good ramp spell, it's just these 3 drops. Like these are some of the best 3 drops in the game right now, and they're pretty much all in this deck. So that is my reasoning for really enjoying playing this deck and having a lot of success with it. I'm not sure why I have 61 cards. I have no idea what my 61st card is. Don't know. Yeah, but that's supposed to be 60. It might just be the Liliana. Yeah, it's Liliana. It's only supposed to be 1 in the main. But yeah, that's my Golgari list. Here is deck number 3 for me. This deck is very similar to Dimir in a lot of ways. Very similar card choices. I did up the Fairy Masterminds, as I've really felt like 4 is where you want to be with that card when you're playing this kind of deck. 3 make disappear, so I did up that count. I did lower the virtue a little bit just because these spells right here with Rafine are going to do a lot of work where you don't need that. I do play 2 Gigs in my list, and that might seem a little weird because we're already drawn so many cards, but to me it just it kind of incorporates the Dimir theme, right? Like, I'm just drawing a ton of cards with all my flyers, which is the same lineup of flyers as Dimir, but we have Rafine in this deck. Don't need as many shielders because of Rafine. You can pump up your bat and gain more life, and then you're drawing so many cards. If you get 1 shieldered out, you can draw like 6-8 life in a turn from that. And then Virtue obviously helps with pumping up your creatures as well. So this deck has been very successful as well. Probably very similar win rate to Dimir, probably around 80%. I think the only reason I don't put it at number 2 is just because it's 3 mana. And sometimes and this is honestly the shuffler. It is the sometimes you get these really wonky hands, which I'm sure that happens in real life too, but it tends to happen a lot, and that's usually the reason you lose when you play this deck, is like because you can't find the right mana. So, you know, that's my one gripe with it, really. Otherwise, it'd be Dimir with Rafine. So in some ways it's better because Rafine is just absolutely nuts and broken, and then in other ways it can be inconsistent. So, but I mean, I do think I have the right mana for this list. The sideboard, you know, there's a lot of different ways you can play the sideboard. Again, I am not the expert on the sideboard, but you know, you can see I have some enchant removal. I'd probably put another one of those in, but I do have Destroy Evil for enchantment removal too, so Get Lost as well. So I don't. There's 4 different enchantment removals. This is Knockout Blows for mono red to gain a little bit of life. Another Cut Down, a couple Duress, Disdainful Stroke Negate, and then the Tidebinder and one Wandering Emperor for those more controlling matchups. But again, this list is a lot of fun too. It's super fast because of Gix and Rafine. Like I don't ever see people play Gix in this, but in best of 1, to me it makes a ton of sense in this deck because you're getting so much card advantage. And sometimes when you just have Rafine in the deck, the difference between this and Dimir is like sometimes your hands are just like, get rid of all my cards and keep 1 card. And I like the ability to replenish my hand, and Gix obviously does a great job of that. And because we are drawing more cards than even Dimir in this deck, we're going to find our shielders. We're going to pump up our bat, so we can gain the life we can afford to have Gix in this deck. So it makes a lot of sense to me. And then, you know, it's my typical 2 Cut Down, 2 Bitter Triumph, and 3 Go for the Throat, just like Dimir. So, but that is number 3. Number 4 is, for me, this is my preferred version because I really enjoy playing the Masquerade. However, I have another list that's a Rakdos more aggressive version as well that I think is very well suited. This version, obviously, want to be more creature heavy because of Masquerade, and we did lower the count. And part of the reason is because a lot of games, Masquerade doesn't feel great, but then there's some games where it feels amazing. So I think 2 is where I want to be. You could probably go up to 3 and be fine. Maybe drop a Preacher. The reason I have 4 Preacher though is because it goes wide, so you're more likely to lose those 1-drops and be able to use the Masquerade in the first place. This deck is just so much fun because of the synergy it has with Inti. And I kind of put all the removal here, so you're using the Bitter Triumphs to discard cards to throw creatures into the graveyard usually. So, and then you're also benefiting from Inti's ability, so it's a pseudo draw card because you can play that card from exile up, and so you usually want to play that on their turn so that you can have basically a card draw. So you're discarding a card, filling your graveyard, and you're getting another card next turn. Same thing with Trumpeting Carnosaur's ability. You can do that with an Inti out. Same thing with Blood Token. You can do that with an Inti out and sacrifice it. This also works really well on turns where you want to get the Carnosaur into the bin and then even play Masquerade on their turn. Cut Down is really nice as a card you could put in here as well for Masquerade, because you would cut down your own creatures once you have a Masquerade out with tokens on your creatures and just kill one of your own creatures, which most of them die to cut down, or at least Blood Tithe, Harvester, Dream Thief, Bat, and Inti. So that's another way, but I have chosen to go with the Wretched Sorrow as another way to gain life. I also upped up to 3 Shieldred, which has felt really nice because oftentimes I find that 3rd Shieldred and I'm able to put it in my graveyard to get it back. There are really cool things you can do with this card. It's a lot of fun to play. So this makes my list, for 1, I'd say it's about 70% win rate. But 2, it's just a lot of fun to play this deck and get Carnosaurs back on your opponent's turn. If you check out some of my earlier videos, I was able to pull that off a few times. And then another cool thing you can do is sacrifice this to kill a creature and then get a Carnosaur back if you already have a Masquerade token. But March feels really good just to gain a little more subtle life, and it's also a way to kill my own creatures. So, and to do that, I cut a Dream Thief and a Masquerade, and I think the 4th Preacher was another cut, or no, I'm sorry, the 3rd Shieldred was another cut for Masquerade. So, but that's kind of, this list feels really balanced now. Sideboard, I think, is in a really good place, and I do feel very confident because I've played a ton of Rakdos about the sideboard. So we add in the 2 cutdowns as kind of our March and cutdowns are similar cards in my mind, because you can still play the March early to kill things, but then later it becomes a life gain. Extract the Truth to deal with enchantments and Brotherhoods and to deal with artifacts. Gix's Command is just another way to gain life. Get your creatures back, get your Carnispus back. Duress and Liliana for domain and control. This is the card that I think needs to be in all Rakdos sideboards right now, and I could even possibly play one of these in here, but because this is a more of an aggressive list, I'm keeping it just in the sideboard. But it's really great against Boros, and then number 2, you want to get rid of graveyards right now, and Black-Red doesn't really have a card other than this. I mean, you have Graveyard Trespasser, you have Lord Skitter, you have the Unlicensed Hearse, but I really like that this gets rid of all graveyards. So certain matchups, you're just going to drop it down on 2 and then get the creature, which is really nice in this deck because you're aggressive. But it's also very good against Boros. So it's impossible to even play 1 of or 2 of in the main in best of 1, depending on how much Boros you're running into. But usually what happens is you put them in your deck and then you never see Boros again. So that's how Arena works. But I also have a Deadly Cover-Up for domain and control. Deadly Cover-Up, one of the things you have to understand about that, especially in a deck like this, where you're getting a lot of cards into the graveyard, and it might even need to be 2 of these, but I think I wanted to have the Gix as a way to get cards back and have another way to gain life. But Deadly Cover-Up against control becomes a pseudo just get rid of something really important from their graveyard in their deck. So as the game lingers on, which it tends to do versus control, Deadly Cover-Up becomes almost like a Stone Brain. Now you can't search the deck and just name a card, but you can search the graveyard. And sometimes control is going to have creatures, so it also works in that way. So Deadly Cover-Up is a really nice card. But that is number 4. But I do want to show you the other Rakdos deck that I just saw a similar list and I kind of tweaked it to my liking. But it's not using the Carnosaur, but it does have, it's kind of a more of a Golgari feel in my mind, but with the Discover of Appraiser. So you have your 2 cutdowns, your 3 Triumph, and 1 Go for the Throat. And this is arguably, I don't know, 3 seems okay to me because you're drawing cards with it, and that I would prefer to play this. I don't think a lot of people would play this. They'd probably just play Go for the Throat. But I also like that Bitter Triumph. Again, we're playing best of 1, so I want to be able to deal with Planeswalkers. And that's one of my weaknesses. So Bitter Triumph handles that, and then I'm playing 4 Inti, so why not? Because then I can benefit from its discard ability. I'm not trying to get cards in the graveyard in this version, but still, to me, it's worth it because you don't want to pay the 3 life sometimes. But it also gives you the option, like if you don't need it, then you just pay the 3 life. 1 Glistening Deluge, just simply because it deals with white and green creatures and gives them -3, and there's a lot of that in best of 1. And then we have the Hidetsugu Consumes All for what I was just talking about, for dealing with those combo decks, exiling all graveyards. There's so many Reanimator decks. And then Boros. And then 1 March as a way to gain life. We're playing 3 Shielded again, and then we're playing 4 Appraiser to get card advantage and be able to hopefully find. You could pop this up to a 2nd Liliana and take out a Deluge, I think. It would be fine, because it's nice to have a Planeswalker hit from Appraiser. And to be honest, that's probably what I'm going to do. Just saying it out loud sounds better. If I'm running into a deck that goes wide, like if I can't handle it with this card and these cards, then whatever. Appraiser does help against wide decks too, though. But I want to be able to have a way to close out the game, and this is a really good card to do so. But this is just a different version. I haven't tried this version out yet, but I've played enough of these types of decks where I feel like this would be a very good deck. But this is just one I saw and I thought was interesting if you didn't want to play the Carnosaur heavy version. And number 5 of my favorite decks to play right now is Rakdos Robbery. This deck is so much fun. I have switched the list around a little bit. I took out 1 Celestis and put in 1 Iron Crag just to be able to ramp a little sooner so we can play a big score or a dragon on turn 4 potentially if we need to. Also helps us ramp into Deadly Cover-Up quicker. So we could play that as early as, let's see, 2, 3. Yeah, I mean, I think it's still turn 4, but the removal is Bitter Triumph, 2 Bitter Triumph, 2 Go for the Throat, 2 Virtue, and that's been really nice as a subtle way to gain life, and then we can play the Virtue down for 7 pretty easy in this deck, and that's really good against a lot of the meta, especially when we play it really early. 4 March as a way to just gain a ton of life and target things twice with Chandra. I mean, the removal feels really nice because when we have a Chandra out, we can play them all twice. And if we're at the point where we have a Chandra out, then we're usually in a place to win. Play a ton of board wipes in this deck because we're more of a control deck. The 4 Deadly Cover-Up is absolutely nuts because we are discarding a lot of cards in this deck with Celestis, with Big Score, and even Bitter Triumph, so that we get the evidence pretty quick. Decadent Dragon is a really fun card. Just stealing the cards is the theme of this deck. Creating treasure tokens, having a ton of mana. A lot of times our win condition is just decking our opponent out. Now, of course, Arena will match us up against decks that have like 200 cards that are like, I don't even know who's playing that or if that's a real person. But so then Outrageous Robbery is not a win con because it's impossible to deck them out. But a lot of times I'll get my opponents down to like, they'll be at like 40 cards and I can deck them out. Because Chandra pumps up for 2 mana, I can play Big Score with a Chandra out and get a ton of treasure tokens. I have a Decadent Dragon out there getting treasure tokens. And then we have Ironcrag Celestis and a bunch of land, and I can just play this card, do it twice for 20, and then boom, they lose the game. So that is definitely a win con. Another win con is just stealing other creatures with Outrageous Robbery and Dragon and just pissing them off and playing their cards, which is just, this deck is just so much fun because you're essentially playing your opponent's deck at a certain point. Very rarely do I just win with swinging in with the Decadent Dragon. And then obviously we're getting back our opponent's creatures here as well. It's all about just kind of being a douche, but it's so much fun. This is like one of those douchey decks that like, I don't care. It's not like I'm playing Azorius Control and just, you know, wasting 30 minutes of everyone's life. But yeah, this is a fun one. So if you haven't tried this one out, check out my video. I am going to post another video of more gameplay recently with this deck. It's been really good. I think it's like 16-5 in Mythic, something like that. So, and the games that we lost were usually just like we couldn't find a land. I did put it up to 25 lands. So another win con is Restless Fence and Murex to close out the game as well. But it was usually like something like we got stuck on land. So the Ironcrag to me is really nice because I can play it early to pump myself up to get to that 4 mana spot. Because once I get here, then I can play a Dragon, I can play a Big Score, and then I can get to my bigger mana spells and be fine, even if I can't find my land. So, and then there's probably times where I'll be able to attach this to a legendary creature that I steal from my opponent too. So that's cool. And I haven't even tried that yet. But the sideboard for this is very similar to what I have been talking about with my other lists. The biggest difference is that we have 3 Shieldred in the sideboard. Still having 2 Extract the Truths, 3 Duress. I wanted 1 The End and 1 Edict just as ways to benefit from Chandra. And this might end up being just like 2 The Ends, just because it kind of does the same theme, yeah, of what this deck wants to do. I don't know what it is about this card. It's always so hard to search for. You have to like... Apparently there's a bunch of cards that say The End. But, yeah, so that's probably where I want that to be at. But that was cool. And then we're playing the Hidetsugu, and this might need to be a 3rd copy, just as a way for Graveyard Hate, and maybe we just take out a Brotherhood End and put in a 3rd copy of that. But I don't have Mythics right now, which this is a Mythic card. But that would probably be a 3rd copy, just as another way to deal with Graveyard Hate. Duress and Liliana for Domain and Control, The End for Domain and Control, Extract the Truth for Domain and Control. I will say that Control and like super aggro are your toughest matchups, which is basically the best 2 decks and best of 1. However, I feel like because I've added in subtle things to deal with aggro like this, and I think even this now, I think aggro is okay. And I did add to do the Path of Peril just because sometimes Brotherhood End is not enough, just as a way. And then we also can cleave this because we have treasure tokens. So Path of Peril makes a lot of sense in this in the main for a best of one, and that might even need to be here instead of this. But I like that this can deal with artifacts, because we don't have great ways to deal with artifacts. We could put in a braid in here, but the problem that we come across here is like, and it could be this, you know, take out one of these, put in a braid in, but we really need to have life gain because we don't have a lot of creatures, so we need to have ways to gain life and come back. And we can draw a ton of cards in this deck when we play a big score. When we have a Chandra out, you draw, essentially discard a card, draw 4 cards, and create 4 treasure tokens. And that's usually what you want to do when you have a Chandra. You want to wait to play this if possible, so that you can really maximize your ability to get a ton of tokens out and then start closing out the game with robberies. And the other thing is, like, even if you don't mill your opponent, you're just stealing a ton of their cards, playing their lands, playing their creatures, you know, playing their strategy against them. So, and kind of acting as a mirror to them, but with Chandra. And Chandra is such a busted planeswalker. I really want to see somebody just break this card because it's so good. Like, the more, that's part of the reason that I love playing this deck, is just I love playing this card. It's so much fun. But we'll do one more that I think is going to be fun, but I have not played it yet. So you may have seen this deck running around. This is kind of my take on it, but if you haven't seen this deck, it is a combo deck where you basically are using all these cards here, where you're drawing a card and discarding a card, with Collector's Vault, the Great Door, and Kaido Shizuki. So where you put one of these big spells into your graveyard, and then on that same turn you reenact the crime. And the cool thing with the Door is that you can do that on your opponent's turn and reenact the crime. So by turn 4, typically, you can get one of these out, and then it can go bananas. You know, you're getting your Atraxas, you're breaching. You want to breach a lot just so you get a ton of graveyard cards in your graveyard, because you want to benefit from this card's ability to collect evidence 10, so that you can just kind of keep playing spells over and over again. This card is a win con if you breach into this card, because you can just play breach over and over again and deck your opponent out on turn 4. So it's a pretty nutty deck. Just spot removal, I think, to take away your biggest threats is what you need, and Bitter Tramp also discards cards. So it might even be 4. I haven't tested this deck yet, and I'm not even sure I even care about this card. It might just be a 3rd Bitter Triumph, or maybe like 1 board wipe, like a Terror, because Terror is based on how much mana you have in your graveyard to wipe the board for 4 mana. But essentially, you can steal all your opponent's cards with Breach as a win con. You can play Atraxa as a win con on turn 4. You can play this card and then collect evidence 10 and, you know, pay for all your spells for free and just keep breaching and keep doing things. Like I said, get this card out, you just deck them out. It is a very powerful combo, and I think people are starting to make the ideal list more and more and more. I just haven't crafted this deck because it's like 8 mythics, and I have 0 mythics right now. And that's, you know, I don't feel like spending $40 just to play a deck and then find out I don't even like it. I have watched people play it, so it looks okay, but this is a deck that I definitely think you have to deal with, and that's why all my decks now are talking about graveyard hate, because of decks like this. And this is the one that I think is the best right now. But yeah, it's something I probably will try in the future. But you also use Beseech the Mirror to sacrifice your artifacts or enchantments. So you can sacrifice any of these enchantments or artifacts and just go ahead and pay the exiled card. And on the same turn, you know, you could say, for example, on turn 4 you draw a card, then discard a card, you discard a Breach, then you play the Beseech the Mirror, you sacrifice this, you get your Reenacted Crime, you get back your Breach, and then it just start your shenanigans. Like, it's nutty. But I do want to try it out, but this is another one that I think you should give a shot. Here's my take on it. This was a sideboard that I got from a recent list that finished 1st place, so not really any thought that I put to it, but just just put it in here just so you could see it. But I did adjust this list a little bit to make it more suitable for me. And this card right here might just need to be a third Bitter Triumph, another way to get cards in the discard. Because I don't like that. I like push pull, but I don't like that it's sorcery in best of 1. In best of 3, I totally see why people play this card. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that because I keep talking about it. So that's kind of where I would be at. I will post all these lists in the link below. Should have, what, I had 6 or 7 lists I just talked about. But yeah, this is my take on what is most fun for me and most successful. And I do think this deck is very successful. I've seen a lot of people play this deck and just kick butt. So it's another one, if you're looking to craft something, this is one that I would definitely consider. And they're also playing the Surveil lands, the Hedge Maze, and this Sewer. So that's another reason that I haven't crafted this yet. But that's just another way to help you get those big boys, the big payoffs into the graveyard. But that's going to do it for this video. If you guys like this, please let me know, and I will try to do more of these in the future. I also am definitely going to post my beating Mono Red over and over and over again video. I have like 11 games now. I think I'm trying to get to 15. But maybe a couple more if I can just get it. I haven't been matched up against that deck at all lately, so I don't know what's going on with that. But as always, please like and subscribe if you enjoy my content. I greatly appreciate it. Y'all have a good one. Peace.